I'm going to start with a confession. I'm a Republican. But humor me for just a few minutes, and let's do an informal poll. In our system of government, we of course have Republicans, Democrats, and independents, and then a variety of other flavors. So by show of hands this morning, how many of you would consider yourselves to be independents? Got a few of those, good. How many would consider yourselves to be Democrats? And how many of you consider yourselves to be Republicans? Finally, how many of you believe that our education system will ever be fixed by political parties? Well, good. If you raised your hand for that last group, I was just going to say, I have some bad news for you. You are delusional. I was once in that group, though, and there is help for you. So no matter what your preconceived notions are when you came in this morning, I'm going to ask you to open your mind for just a few moments and consider the case I'd like to make. And if I fail to persuade you, then feel free to return to your current thinking. Here's my thesis for your consideration. We must revolutionize our education delivery system in America. That's it. That's all I'm asking for. Open education up, allow for choice, allow for innovation and freedom. I want to back up just a second and tell you just a little bit about my own story. I always find listening to a speaker more enjoyable if I know just a little bit about him or her. So as a kid, I grew up middle class, but my father was a great innovator with an entrepreneurial spirit, and it wasn't long before my family became part of the infamous 1%. My husband's family has a similar story, and together my husband and I have also been successful in innovative and entrepreneurial ventures. So I'm not only a Republican, even worse, I'm a well-off Republican. I spent a number of years working in Republican politics. I was chairman of the Michigan Republican Party, held a lot of other political positions. I had a lot of success in partisan politics. And then I quit. I don't apologize for being involved in politics, but I did become frustrated by them. Why? Because my real passion in life is education and learning, and I like to think big about education. So I want to convince you in the next 30 minutes to think big about education too. You see, the world's full of small thinkers who tinker around the edges, and we don't need more of those. I won't waste your time with a lot of lofty rhetoric. I'll be blunt, and since I got out of politics, I have the freedom to be politically incorrect too. So let's start by being brutally honest about the status of K-12 education in America today. Not what we wish the status was, not what we want it to be, but what it really is. I'm going to throw 6 inconvenient truths at you. The reason for this approach is because we will never solve a problem if we refuse to admit it. Inconvenient truth number 1. Our education delivery system in America is antiquated, and it is quite frankly embarrassing. Let's take the example of the Model T. In my home state of Michigan, there was a time when the assembly line for making Model Ts was the envy of the world. There was also a time when the American education delivery system was the envy of the world. But if Detroit had not innovated, if Detroit was still employing the same delivery system for producing automobiles today as they were 90 years ago, American cars would be obsolete. Yet in that same time period, our education delivery system has not innovated or changed at all. Second example, Kodak. The American education system is fast approaching its Kodak moment. You all remember Kodak, right? Well, maybe not all of you do. It probably depends on how old you are. Like Kodak, our education system's fast approaching its moment to either perish into obsolescence or to revolutionize and thrive. Inconvenient truth number 2. American education has been losing ground to other countries for at least half a century. The facts here are inarguable. You can see some of them on the screen, but it's really a waste of our time to even slog through this. It's just plain true, and everyone knows it. The one statistic I would call your attention to is this: PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment. Arne Duncan called the results a picture of education stagnation. The United States ranks 17th in reading, 21st in science, and 26th in math. Oh, there are always a few people in denial, and there are a few who are content, and there are defenders of the status quo, but that is an intellectually indefensible position. Not only are we falling behind collectively in relationship to other countries, we have far too many children who are straight up failing, and they are largely concentrated in economically disadvantaged areas. And we have too many children in middle-class suburban areas that we think are doing well, but that are actually seriously underperforming. The truth is that each and every child deserves the opportunity to fully develop their potential. And collectively, our country will not be competitive unless all kids have opportunity. Inconvenient truth number 3. We are stuck in a partisan rut. The political parties are dead-enders when it comes to education revolution. As long as we think political parties might solve the problem, it will never be solved. Oddly enough, education choice is very unique in that some conservative Republicans and some liberal Democrats are actually on the same wavelength. For instance, John Boehner, Jeb Bush, Condi Rice, and Bobby Jindal are examples of Republican leaders who are actually willing to lead positively on this issue. And on the Democrat side, Mike McCurry, Dianne Feinstein, Cory Booker, and Andrew Cuomo are willing to buck their party leaders. And believe it or not, Democrats have led school choice efforts in Arizona, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, and Oklahoma. But those are exceptions. The vast majority of the political class is committed to defending and protecting the status quo. Now, let me get politically incorrect in discussing the political parties. Let's start with Republicans. Many Republicans in the suburbs like the idea of education choice as a concept, right up until it means that poor kids from the inner city might invade their schools. That's when you'll hear the sentiment, well, it's not really a great idea to have poor minority kids coming to our good suburban schools, though they'll never actually say those words aloud. In my home state of Michigan, one of our Republican legislators, who everyone assumed was a supporter of education choice, in fact came out against even the minor step of public school choice. His reason was that his district bordered the city of Detroit. Enough said. And just last year, we saw Republicans in Tennessee, Oklahoma, and Mississippi taking the lead in killing various education choice measures, all in deep red states. Now let's talk about Democrats. Many Democrats love the idea of providing equal opportunity, right up until the moment when the teachers' union leaders say no. When that happens, they salute and fall back into formation. I've had many conversations with Democrat politicians who know in their heart of hearts that education choice is the right thing, but who admit in private that they cannot afford to get crossed up with the teachers' unions and the party bosses. It's a perfect recipe for an intractable political standoff. Meanwhile, America falls further behind. Too many kids are denied an opportunity. Too many kids get substandard educations. The status quo remains, change is thwarted, and everyone loses. Let me give you a real-world example of what I'm talking about. And I'd like you to think about this as if we were talking about your own children. Here are your two choices. Alpha School is a high-performing school with graduation rates ranging from 70 to 90%, depending on the year. Beta School is a low-performing school with graduation rates hovering around 50%. If you were given the choice between Alpha School and Beta School for your children, which would you choose? If you chose Alpha School, then in Washington, D.C., you chose a private or charter school for your kids. If you chose Beta School, then in Washington, D.C., you chose the traditional public school. If you want to risk sending your kids to a failing school, that's certainly your choice. But why would you deny the high-performing Alpha School choice to anyone else? And yet, our president has tried to terminate these options in Washington, D.C., while at the same time he sends his daughters to an elite private school. It's illogical, it's hypocritical, and frankly, it's immoral. Inconvenient truth number 4. Government really sucks. And it doesn't matter which party is in power. Having been around politics and government my entire adult life, I have 5 observations about government for you. Government tends to believe in top-down solutions, and government fears bottom-up solutions. Government tends to stifle innovation, and it abhors improvisation. Any good military strategist will tell you that a battle plan rarely survives past the first engagement. After that, you have to improvise to survive and to win. Government tends to favor one-size-fits-all solutions handed down from central command. Government likes committees, a lot. Committees kill all the really good ideas and generally all the really bad ideas. They produce middle ground mush. Government prefers control and tightly defined systems. It fears entrepreneurs, open systems, and crowdsourcing, all of which they find threatening. Inconvenient truth number 5. We don't pay teachers enough, and we don't fire teachers enough. In that one sentence, I've raised the ire of both the Republican and Democrat political establishments. The Republicans don't want to bust the budget and pay our best teachers enough, and the Democrats don't want to reform tenure laws. It's another partisan standoff. But I'm willing to bet that every one of you had one or more teachers who made a big difference in your life, who opened your eyes to possibilities and to opportunities. You probably recall them in your mind's eye right now. And likewise, I'm pretty sure that every one of you had one or more teachers who should not have been teaching. That doesn't mean they were bad people, or maybe they were, but regardless, they weren't any good at teaching. You're probably thinking of those teachers right now, too. And by the way, teaching is hard. It takes a lot of skill. Not everyone who tries it can do it well. We need to admit that and act accordingly. We should reward and respect great teachers by paying them more, and we should stop rewarding seniority over effectiveness. Political parties will not fix this. Republicans don't want to pay teachers enough, and Democrats don't want to reform tenure laws. It's another partisan standoff, and the status quo remains. Lastly, inconvenient truth number 6. In America, we do not provide equal educational opportunity to our kids. This one is the worst of the worst. How many here believe that every child deserves an equal opportunity for a quality education? Good. But that concept is a myth in America today. We don't provide anything of the sort, not even close. If you live in an area with quality public schools, you can most likely get a reasonable education. In most cases, this means you do not live in an economically depressed area. If you don't live in an area with good public schools, you can move to a different place if you have the financial means to do so. If you don't, you're screwed. If your local public schools aren't very good, but you have the cash, you can send your kids to a higher performing private school. But if you don't have the financial resources, you are again screwed. It is not defensible that today you can predict educational outcomes by the zip code in which someone lives. Defenders of the status quo will tell you to wait and be patient, that things are improving and that things will really improve if they can just get some more money. Really? If money was the answer, we would not have a problem. And just think how incredibly arrogant it is to say to the mom of a third grader, just wait, it will get better. No, her third grader will only grow up once. There is no time to wait. And as we know, too many politicians and too many leaders from within the education system oppose education choice, but they use it for their own families. As my good friend Howard Fuller says, if choice is so bad, why don't you give it up for your family? For many defenders of the status quo, it's not their ideology that bothers me, it's their complete hypocrisy that I can't stomach. We do not have equal educational opportunity in America. This is not just an inconvenient truth, it is immoral. Don't worry about well-off people. They'll find a way to get a good education for their children. But if the least of these are denied an equal opportunity, and they are, then our education industry is failing, and it is. So, how should equal opportunity in education look? First, let the education dollars follow each child instead of forcing the child to follow the dollars. This is pretty straightforward. And it's how you go from a closed system to an open system that encourages innovation. People deserve choices and options. Let's hear from Denisha Merriweather, a student that got an opportunity through the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship Program.
Steps into your backyard.
If it wasn't for the scholarship, if it wasn't for the school, you would probably meet me on the corner with a baby, trying to make ends meet. I would probably have a job. McDonald's. This is the school my 20-year-old brother went to, and he dropped out. My uncle dropped out of this school. My mother dropped out of this school. If I would have went to this school, I would have probably dropped out too. He speaks fluent Japanese. Like, who does that? Like, if he was able to attend, a private school and step up for student scholarship, I think his life would have been much different. Like, I think he would have believed in himself more, It's sad. It's sad.
See, Denisha, I think this is what the program is all about. Because she's actually featured in a video. You can see it on YouTube. You can go see her on like 10,000 people already have on there. And she says, before I hate to use your own words, but she said before I got the scholarship, I was struggling in the school I was assigned to, and now I'm college bound, and now she's about to graduate, and that's what our program is all about: is helping children find the right environment where they can thrive and be as successful as Denisha.
The old definition of public education and an emerging new definition. The old definition of public education is we take taxpayer dollars and we hand it over to school districts. They run all the schools in a fairly uniform manner, and then they assign children to them by their zip codes. That used to be the definition of public education. What we're moving towards now is a new definition where we raise taxpayer dollars, and then parents direct those dollars to different providers and even different delivery methods. I think there are amazing public schools in low-income areas. And there are amazing private schools in low-income areas and amazing charter schools in low-income areas. The key is empowering the parent of little means to make the choice to put her child in the one that is the best fit for her kid.
12 steps into your backyard. Through tall green grass and into the wild.
Well, I think that Step Up is considered successful just by its sheer numbers. I mean, we had 60,000 children on the scholarship program this year. It's the largest parental choice program in the country. That's certainly one reason. We have the data to show and the research to show that once they come on the program, their downward trajectories are reversed, and their learning gains are now equal to children of all incomes, including high-income children.
I don't know where they would have been at. See, Step Up for Students helped them to get into the program. They've been doing real good, very good. Yeah, without Step Up for Students, I wouldn't have made it.
It's stable. I know that this is going to always be there. This teacher is going to always have my back. This teacher is going to always root for me. But as far as four-year university, I'm the first person in my entire family, not just my immediate family, but my entire family. So I'm making a lot of people proud. A lot of people are counting on me.
promised me one thing, that you're going to be a decent good little girl, and that you're going to do your work in school, that you're going to let nothing stop you, and you're going to go finish. And guess what? She come out May the 3rd from college. She's getting her bachelor's degree. And I think she's going to go further and step up as students able her to get all this good education. Yes, and I just thank God for it.
So Denisha's story is compelling. I think we can all agree on that. Thinking about her and millions of others like her, what would an open system of choices look like? Traditional public schools, public school choice, charter schools, virtual schools, online learning, private and parochial schools, home schools, course choice, blended options of all of the above, and perhaps most importantly, new approaches to learning that have yet to be imagined or developed. Let's talk about a few examples of new thinking and approaches to learning that should be embraced, but that the status quo finds terrifying. Khan Academy. You can hear more from Sal Khan tomorrow, but his simple approach puts the emphasis on mastery of concepts, and it has far-reaching implications for an open system. Hole-in-the-Wall experiment and School in the Cloud. Dr. Sagata Mitra, winner of the 2013 TED Prize, demonstrates that all children, even those with no formal training and from some of the most impoverished communities, can self-organize and self-learn. Jose Urbina Lopez Primary School. Teacher Juarez Correa applied some of the principles from Dr. Mitra's research to his classroom in Matamoros, Mexico, and the results were breathtaking, including one student who went from being a bored, uninterested, below-average student to becoming recognized as a national math whiz. KIPP Academies, Success Academies in Harlem, Hope Academies in Milwaukee, Cristo Rey Schools, a network of 25 high schools that serve urban and low-income families. The school partners with local businesses who help pay for tuition through providing real-life professional opportunities for the students. West Michigan Aviation Academy. This is a personal example, admittedly. My husband founded this charter high school after I encouraged him to combine two of his passions, education and flying. He flies jets and helicopters and loves teaching others about it. And yes, a bunch of those kids in the school are from the inner city. And yes, a number of them get private pilot's licenses while they get their high school education. The Acton Academy. I'm really looking forward to visiting the Acton Academy later today, an innovative 21st century approach to learning right here in Austin. You can hear from Jess Sandifer, the founder, speak this afternoon. So these are but a few of the new approaches to education and learning. But there's one thing all of these innovative ideas have in common. The status quo, in varying degrees, finds them all threatening. Technology has changed how kids interact with learning, and anyone who doesn't embrace that is kidding themselves. Here's a little personal look at how technology changes the ways kids interact. A video of my two granddaughters when Clara was not yet 2 and Sloane is only 4 months. She's 4 months.
What are you doing, Clara? Be gentle.
So, what can be done about all this? It's easy. All we need is an education revolution. Change is hard, but change is not difficult. People naturally resist change. But without change and without innovation, everything withers on the vine. We need an army of big thinkers, of entrepreneurs and innovators, of tech-savvy people who are not afraid of or intimidated by entrenched powers. We need to overcome the political class that keeps us bound to a ridiculously antiquated status quo. I believe this revolution will be fueled by the younger generation. The older generations are too wedded to political parties, too wedded to romantic memories of what education was like when they were kids, and too wedded to the status quo group that clings to power. It really is time for everyone to acknowledge the need to open things up in education and to modernize and innovate. We need to think big and envision the way things could be and then move to make it happen. This is not a battle of left versus right, Democrat versus Republican. It's a battle of industrial age versus the digital age. It's the Model T versus the Tesla. It's old factory model versus the new internet model. It's the Luddites versus the future. We must open up the education industry, and let's not kid ourselves that it isn't an industry. We must open it up to entrepreneurs and innovators. This is how families without means will get access to a world-class education. This is how a student who's not learning in their current model can find an individualized learning environment that will meet their needs. We're the beneficiaries of startups, ventures, and innovation in every other area of life. But we don't have that in education because it's a closed system, a closed industry, a closed market. It's a monopoly, a dead end. And the best and brightest innovators and risk takers steer way clear of it. As long as education remains a closed system, we will never see the education equivalents of Google, Facebook, Amazon, PayPal, Wikipedia, or Uber. We won't see any real innovation that benefits more than a handful of students. Everyone knows that monopolies suffocate progress. We need to turn our creativity loose and break free from the partisan World War I-style trench warfare that embodies the current debate. I don't care who the winners or losers are in the current partisan political debates. That is immaterial. If we can manage to break free, to open the system, and embrace all choices for education, we'll be the first to have the politicians hang awards on their office walls. But most importantly, the next generation of kids will be the real winners. And collectively, as Americans, we will all benefit from their unleashed horsepower. So if you claim you are for freedom, if you claim to be an innovator or value innovation, if you claim to be an entrepreneur, if you claim to believe in equal opportunity, if you claim to embrace social justice, then you have to embrace educational choice, and you have to embrace opening up our closed education delivery system. Thanks for your attention. I don't have all the answers, but I'll be happy to take your questions and do my best to answer them. Thank you. Who wants to be first?
Assuming we're supposed to be here for the questions.
Okay.
Thank you. I thought that was a great presentation. My name is Will Staten, and I actually work for Democracy Prep Public Schools, a network of charters. And I'm all about school choice. One of the things, I think I have two questions here that I often find. It seems that sometimes school choice hits a wall because there aren't enough varieties of good schools to make it a reality. And you did address that a little bit by mentioning some specific schools. But in order to make that both sustainable and scalable, I think the bigger issue is how do you get and keep talent in the field of education? Because unfortunately, we look at teaching as a second-class profession. I think it's the most important job in the country, and not a second-class profession. Also, my first question would be, how do you scale the schools that you mentioned and replicate those all over the country, especially in places that don't have the resources of New York City? So, for example, I'm originally from Mississippi, and we don't have the luxury of some of the philanthropic money that New York benefits from? And then the second question is, how do you elevate the profession of teaching? Because again, I think that if you'll pardon my language, you know, those who can do, those who can't teach, frankly, is bullshit. Those who can do because at some point during their life they had a good teacher. And so those are the kind of two questions. How do we make this available really for every kid in this country?
Thanks for your questions, and thanks for teaching in a school that is making a major difference.
I don't teach anymore. I did. I do recruitment now, but I was
Awesome.
formerly a teacher, and the
Good.
people who currently teach have a more important job than I do, certainly.
Awesome. Well, your first question about how do we get resources to all kids, it really requires changing the system we currently have and changing policy to allow the dollars to follow the child, to follow each student, rather than going directly to a school building or a school district. If every child had the resources committed to him or her that are already essentially spent on them, it would unleash the economic power to make those choices regardless of what state in which you live. The reality is our country as a nation spends more than every other country in the world per child on education. With the exception of, I think it's Luxembourg, a major economic force in the world. So, I mean, fundamentally, the dollars should follow every single child, and should be, and they and their parents should be empowered to make the best choice for that child's particular education. As far as good teachers and recognizing good teachers, I couldn't agree with you more that an excellent teacher should be a very highly valued individual, and I think teaching has become very deprofessionalized over the years, as it's been part of an industry that has continued to be very closed to itself and I would argue self-serving. I believe that opening up the system will go a long way toward placing a renewed value on the quality of a good teacher. And I believe that more young people will be encouraged to enter the field of teaching if we have the kind of innovation and creativity in education in general that I think would be unleashed by the notion of full and open education choice.
Good morning. I'm
morning.
Per Lager. I come from Stockholm, Sweden. I guess you have been to Sweden maybe to explore a country where this model actually is up and running for 20 years.
I'm somewhat familiar with Sweden, but share with us about...
Matter of fact, for some reason, I can't really put forward the right analysis how this all started, but 25 years ago, we made this change, that the money follows the student. And of course, it's not the student to make the choice, at least not in the K-12, but of course, it's the parents. So we have had this system. Mostly, it had been working quite well, but for the last 5-10 years, we are really losing ground in PISA. So we're doing analysis now that one major problem is that people from or families from low-income households, they don't choose. They don't have the ability, maybe the knowledge, the competence, the time, single parents and so forth. So they don't choose. So the people from the poorest family get stuck in the worst schools. And the people with a little bit better family income and so forth, they choose to go to schools that are improving or have the right competence and so forth. So that's our problem right now. I think that's absolutely nothing that we can't fix. I think that this reform has really spurred creativity. We see a lot of new types of pedagogic moving forward. And we can also see that it's also something both good and bad, that the schools that have moved forward, private initiatives or non-profit initiatives with new types of pedagogic, they have by far the best results. The worst results are from the old public schools in, of course, a little bit tougher neighborhoods. So, and I know that maybe in the USA, Sweden is not most well known for being super liberal. But in this case, we are maybe the most liberal country in the world. So I urge everybody to take a look in Sweden, to learn from the best part, and maybe to learn from what has not been working so well. But I think it's fantastic that you drive this initiative, and I believe that it will spare or put forward a lot of more creative way of working with schools.
Thanks for sharing that. I have been somewhat peripherally aware of what's going on in Sweden, and I guess it's to address the issue of some families from low-income situations not actually making those choices. I can understand how that is a challenge, and I can see that would be and will be a challenge here for us. But the reality is that there will be some of those families that will make a choice and a challenge that don't have that opportunity today. And I think the more energy and creativity we interject into the whole notion and system of education, the more likely it is that we're also going to start placing a higher value on education in general, that people will have more of a personal investment in their child's education because they are empowered to make a decision that today they're not empowered to make in the same way. Other questions? I know it's kind of early in the morning for some of you.
So my question is about sort of the conflict between the whole idea of like schools of choice and the idea of being a public school. I work in Dallas ISD, and we're going through this really big change where they're trying to push for more schools of choice and trying to have more schools that have specific and different models to accommodate different learning styles and things like that. And we've got some pretty phenomenal magnet schools in Dallas ISD as well, some of the top schools in the country, but we've also got some of the worst schools in the country in the same district. And one of the issues that we struggle with, because our school is becoming a personalized learning campus in the fall, is a lot of the other schools of choice and a lot of the other like high performing charters and the magnet schools and the schools that, you know, are being pushed out as these models of excellence also have limits. They have higher entry standards. Kids have to apply to a lot of these schools, or you know, there's required parent involvement. There's requirements of, you know, a certain amount of more, whereas our school, regardless of what change we're making next year, we can't do any of those things because we're still a neighborhood school. And honestly, I think it's better to be a neighborhood school because a lot of the kids that may never get into a magnet school still need those kinds of things. So I guess my question is, how do you balance the idea of becoming one of these like schools of choice, becoming one of these, you know, schools that is highly specified, highly dynamic, highly innovative, but at the same time dealing with the reality of that we're a middle school with 1,200 students and we have no, you know, we are a public school, we are not a magnet, we have no freedom or flexibility as far as entry requirements, and nor do I think we should, but how do you strike that balance?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and I guess I would probably disagree with your premise a little bit that you shouldn't be able to innovate or change in any way. I think it kind of speaks to my point that generally government likes to have top-down solutions mandated by a bunch of people who are really smart and think that they can figure out what's best for everybody under their purview. But my argument would be that empowering the people who are going to be consumers of the education and letting that empowerment drive the response, that you will get a lot of different responses to that. And maybe a school that now is, you said it was 1,200 kids in middle school, so about 400 kids per grade. You know, there's probably a lot of parents there that think that's too many middle schoolers to be all clustered together at the same time. Having gone through middle school myself, I mean, that would be like frightening to me. Maybe that's not right for a lot of people, and maybe they would choose to go to a very small school that may have a similar approach to educating, but not have, you know, such a mass of kids. But the point being that I don't think government does well with mandating a top-down version in just about everything that they do, education in particular. And so, again, freeing up and empowering parents to make those choices will result in a lot of creativity and a lot of new options for parents and students over time. It's not something that is going to happen overnight, but it has the likelihood of happening much more decisively and much more quickly if parents and students are empowered with those resources. Hi.
I kind of have a follow-up question to his question. I teach in a public school in a suburban area, and we are very economically diverse. So we have very high-income families in our school and then also very low-income families. So I understand what you're saying about choice, but my question is, do you worry that that choice will then result in what our Swedish friend talked about, where you create these pockets of poverty in your communities, and then teachers have choices. So some teachers are going to choose to stay and really try to empower those students, but when you don't have funds, because those funds have followed other children, do you feel like that's going to create pockets of poverty, and then how do you fix that problem?
Well, I think if you have a great quality product to offer, you're going to attract people to avail themselves of your services. So if you aren't able to attract people and students and have them stay and be a committed part of your school, then maybe there's a reason that you shouldn't exist. But today, the reality is today, we don't have any of those kinds of situations. I mean, there's way, way, way too many traditional public schools that are open simply because they exist and because they're continuing to receive taxpayer dollars with no accountability for results. Again, in every other area of our life where there is competition, and I mean competition in a good and healthy way, not, sometimes when we talk about competition, we think about, you know, heated athletic contests between, you know, the rival high schools or something. That's not the kind. If you have healthy competition and you have a quality product to offer, you're going to attract people to what you have to offer. And if you don't, you're going to have to either adjust or go away. That's just, you know, that's what happens in the rest of life, and I think that's what should be the reality in the education marketplace as well.
So sort of similar to that school choice or teacher choice question, should I move this down? I'm a high school student here in town. I go to one of the top performing magnet schools in the nation. And we are housed on top of one of the consistently failing neighborhood schools. It's a weird divide. The magnet school
you're in the same building.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And as a magnet school, we get people aren't really a fan of us. Our PR is sort of poor because we are on top of a constantly failing school. What I'm wondering is, how do you sort of keep and attract teachers to a campus like that, especially in a high school setting? Because these kids have gone through failing elementary, failing middle schools. So I feel like a lot of times teachers don't want to come in at that high school point to try and, you know, play catch up for 4 years. So how do you encourage great teachers? Because a lot of the great teachers I've seen down there, I'm on news staff, so I'm constantly interviewing people downstairs. They are leaving throughout the year, just off to better jobs, better opportunities, higher pay elsewhere. So is there any way at this level of education you can attract and keep teachers?
So you're asking specifically about the school that is housed in the same building, not your school?
Yes, the
traditional
yes.
school that's not serving or not doing well with its population. Well, I think this is just another demonstration of the problem and the issue, where you have a school that's controlled from the top and that is not able to, of its own accord, change and innovate and offer what is needed and necessary for those students. And so there's no, it's not a surprise that teachers get frustrated with the situation and want to move somewhere else. Some of the most committed and excited teachers that I've witnessed have been, and this is of course an up close and personal example, the West Michigan Aviation Academy that my husband founded. They're serving a very diverse population, but the difference is that all of those kids and their parents have chosen to be there. And so you have a different level, you have a different dynamic and a different level of commitment on the part of the students and on the part of the parents. And I think that just speaks to what we're talking about here is the ability to make choices, and then I guess the relationship between the students and the faculty is a different dynamic than if you are assigned to be there based on your zip code.
So you presented two choices. One choice is leave the system the way it is, the status quo, which I think everybody in this room understands isn't good enough, and the other choice is school choice. But what other choices have you considered that could also transform education? Because there can't be just two.
Well, having been working in this for almost 25 years, and having been convinced from the start that that there were ways to encourage the existing system to change from within, I've become convinced pretty conclusively that the system is not going to change of its own accord, and that it's only with other options being presented from the outside, in other words, opening it up for choices, that we're ultimately going to have fundamental change for everyone. And so I guess I would have a hard time saying that there is really another viable option for fundamentally changing the trajectory of education in this country. I haven't been able to identify any of those, and I've been around this world for a long period of time, so. Not as long as I have. Maybe not quite, but a long time.
Hi, I had a question about the competitive system that you referenced, and I wonder if you would discuss and perhaps consider some of the areas that would create a level playing field between some of the schools of choice and charters and traditional public schools. In Texas, for example, I'll just give two examples. What often happens is that it becomes more charters choosing students rather than parents choosing charters, in that charters do not have to accept students who have any discipline kinds of records. That's in the statute. So what happens is that that's a selection process. Discipline with kids, middle school, high school being a proxy for chaos in their lives. Parents may have, maybe split families, mom or dad incarcerated. So you create this, so you don't have a level playing field. The U.S. Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education just reached a settlement with the largest charter school in Texas, Harmony Charter Schools, because they documented that they were, what they phrased, some of their processes were having a chilling effect on the recruitment enrollment of students. So they didn't have Spanish-speaking people at the enrollment fairs, and they didn't put information out in Spanish. So what you had, again, is this not a level playing field. So they were basically enrolling students, so the enrollment was not actually, in fact, open to all students, and they reached a settlement. And third, there's a University of Texas paper just out that's been peer-reviewed showing in Austin and Houston, you have this huge differentiation between the enrollment of special ed students and English language learners when you look at charter schools in the neighborhood. So what you have basically is not a level playing field. So I wonder if you might talk about how legislation or what you would support to create a true level playing field so that you don't end up with these two systems, one that has students that are less challenging and another system that has students that are more challenging, because we know that's more expensive to educate.
Thanks, good question. And I mean, clearly the initial legislation from which you work has to anticipate those who would try to game things. I would say that, again, from, I will refer to the Aviation Academy, a charter school in Michigan, where, and Michigan's charter laws are probably somewhat different than Texas's, so we're not comparing apples to apples, but there it's really a first come, first served until you've reached the level of capacity, and then you actually go into a lottery system beyond that. But there's also you know, a contract that parents will sign, parents and students will sign, that talks about what the expectations are for personal behavior and commitment to one's education and so forth. And some, you know, some students self-disqualify based on what their what expectations are communicated. It is true that traditional public schools essentially have to take whomever comes in their doors. And by the same token, I know that there are a lot of schools of choice in various forms, whether they're private and parochial schools or charter schools, that specifically look for students that have been troubled and struggling in another setting. So I think, I mean, I think your question is a valid one, and the concern is a valid one, but I think that rather than that getting the framework for legislation right around this is an important point to start from, but that we should also recognize and you know, be transparent about that being a potential and willing to discuss that, but not let that dissuade us from moving to what we know will ultimately be best for all kids, and that is where they have choices across the board to make. You know, many of those kids probably would benefit from a more virtual or online environment that's within a monitored structure or a, you know, coached structure by someone else too. Again, we don't have the full range of choices even available today because of the economics of how we do education now. And I think if we anticipate every potential problem that might unfold, we could be stymied forever in making progress forward. But I think we have to move ahead and change how we've done education and how we fund it and how we keep a closed system expecting everybody to sort of fall in line or figure out their own way economically out of it. We have a mass exodus, so we must be just about to the end here. Is there a last question?
Hi. So a little bit about my background in teaching. I spent the majority of my teaching career in a Title I school, and then I am now in the opposite extreme, a very affluent, competitive district. So I've seen both sides of the public education system, I'd say. And my heart is really, you know, it's probably with my Title I school, I would say. So I believe in what you're saying. I believe in equality for all students. So practically speaking, what can I do as a teacher or as a parent to start to evoke this change?
Well, in Texas here, I believe that there's various initiatives that are being considered in the Texas legislature now. I'm not conversant on the details of all of them, but I would encourage you to try to connect with those who are working on that. And somebody from our team can probably get you some more specific contacts. We aren't working specifically in Texas now, so I can't, off the top of my head, give you some resources to seek, but we can help you with that, and we'll be happy to do that. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your time and for your interest.